Hi, Caroline. Thank you so much for being here today. We're super excited to get to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
I'm Caroline Ailanthus. I write. I always say that I went to a series of small, strange schools, mostly in New England, which is true. Every time I try and talk about my education in detail, I'm like, well, let me tell you the song of my people. These weird places. Nice though. My bachelor's degree is in environmental leadership, which I studied everything I was interested in. And then I went to my advisor and I said, okay, what's this called? That's what she said. And I have a master's degree in conservation biology, and which has something to do with the fact that I write fiction with a lot of science in it. I've had people tell me, aren't you worried that this is going to be too sciencey? And I say, there is no such thing as too sciencey for people who like science,
Love
which I do. I think it's fascinating. And I'm not the only one. So that's what you know, um, I have been writing professionally full time for 10 years now. I broke into print 20 years ago uh, with, short, mostly nonfiction pieces. I've been writing seriously since I was 12. Um, I'm all over the place. I do a little bit of everything, except I'm always writing. That's what it always comes back to.
that.
So I have 2 books published now and a couple of other things.
Amazing. What are your books about?
Do you mean theme or do you mean plot synopsis? There's 2 ways to talk about what a book's about.
Yep. So, whatever one you prefer to explain your books would be great.
Okay. First one's a little bit hard to explain, but it's set 3.5 million years ago, which gives you an idea. Most of the characters are not human. So there's this one storyline that follows this community of proto-human ape-like creatures for 70 years. And then there's a parallel storyline about a human artist who is studying their bones. And there's no time travel or anything, but the 2 storylines kind of, thematically interact. So that's my first one, To Give a Rose. The second one, Ecological Memories, easier to describe. It's set shortly after, 20 years after the end of our civilization and the beginning of the next one. So the main character, Elsie, she was a child when the collapse happened, and she doesn't remember how she survived it or where she was. She just has this vague idea that she had a childhood home somewhere. And she's studying to be an environmental educator, and she's apprenticed to an ecologist. So she starts having these flashbacks of these trees she played among, this forest. And he's an ecologist, so he offers to help her figure out where a forest like that might grow. So maybe they can find her home. And then in the process of all of that, his trauma from the collapse starts coming up too. And they end up having to help each other get through it. And
Real quick.
I like to say it's a scientific detective story meets post-apocalyptic travel log.
Love that. For the people who don't know what an ecologist is, could you explain that a little bit more?
Oh, sure. It can get confusing when you hear the term used because a lot of people misuse it. About a generation or so ago, the word ecology got really popular. And so a lot of people started using it for job descriptions that had previously had names like, game warden and things like that. So it can get really confusing. But properly speaking, ecology is the study of the relationship between living things. So what a species eats, how it avoids getting eaten, how it interacts with its environment, how it interacts with other species. So it's study of relationships.
Amazing. Thank you for that. What inspired you to write your books?
Well, I'll explain the second one first, and if we have time, I'll get into the first one too, because there's a bit of a story behind it, and it goes back to when I was 11. And my class got this awesome classroom assignment to rewrite the US Constitution. So, we were supposed to frame our ideas and debate with each other and think about, what a country needs to run. And we spent about a week doing that, and that was fun. And I never stopped doing the assignment. I just kept on thinking, how else could this country be? What, not necessarily better or worse, just different. It doesn't have to be like this. And then I got older and I started becoming a lot more aware of a lot of things that are wrong. And the whole daydream got sort of an edge. And the whole idea of, well, if everything falls apart, then this other thing could happen and everything would be better than, I went there. And I went there for a lot of years, just daydreaming the apocalypse to make myself feel better. And then I thought, wait, I'm making myself feel better by imagining this scenario that's going to kill billions of people. There's something wrong with that. I don't want to even as a daydream, there's something wrong with that. So I challenged myself to think about not just how everything would be better, but what it would be actually like to live through the end of civilization. Even if what comes after that is really good, what would that be like to live through? And my book, Ecological Memory, is my answer to that question. How do you put yourself together after everything falls apart? How do you find meaning in that?
When you were writing your book, who were you thinking of when it comes to who your book is for?
Do you mean target audience or okay, other people like me? I mean, when I'm writing, I'm thinking about what book do I want to read. When I'm done writing, I start thinking about, okay, who else is going to want to read this? And how do I identify them? How do I find them? And yeah, it's going to be mostly people who are not necessarily scientists. You don't need a degree to read my stuff, but who find it interesting. Watch nature documentaries, think scientists are cool. If you had a crush on a scientist when you were a kid, you're going to like my book. Uh, David Attenborough fans right here. People who like reading, say, Barbara Kingsolver books are probably going to like mine too. There's a lot of character development, a lot of thematic development, a lot of playing with ideas. And, it's not dry at all, but it's really cool when you think scientists are really cool. That's what it is. But I don't think about that when I write.
Love it. How long have you been writing? I know you touched on this, but how long have you been writing and what made you really sit down and start to write your books?
You mean what made me sit down and decide to do this seriously?
Yes.
Part of it, I mean, I've always been writing. There are drawings I made when I was 5 or 6 years old that had captions on them that my mom wrote. I dictated them to her. And those captions prove that the drawings are illustrations of stories. So in one sense, I was writing before I could write. when I was maybe somewhere around 10, something like that, I started to notice that the grown-ups who did the things that I like to do and talked about the things I like to talk about, basically talk about my imaginary friends. Grown-ups who talk about their imaginary friends all the time, they're writers. That's how you do that. And then the other thing that there's a writer, Tim Cahill or Cahill, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. He's awesome though. You want to check him out. He's an essayist and a journalist. He was one of the founding writers of Outside Magazine, and he has a couple of collections out. Jaguars Ripped My Flesh is the first one. Very tongue-in-cheek title. Anyway, it occurred to me reading his stuff. Here's a man who goes on adventures in order to write. He wants to write an article about diving with sharks or hang gliding or whatever. And then he goes diving with sharks or hang gliding. And that you can do this. You can call somebody up and say, hey, I want to write an article about this cool thing. Will you help me have this experience so I can? And I thought, okay, I need that job. I've never gone diving with sharks, but I have in fact done things like emailed the Jane Goodall Institute and say, I have some questions, or, emailed the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and say, I have some questions. How cool is that? Like being a it's a fun job. And Tim Cahill or Cahill keyed me into that aspect of it. It's like, yeah, that's what I want to do. So I got busy preparing to do it. I knew I wasn't going to publish a novel at 11 or 12 years old. But I got serious I knew I had a lot of work to do. I had a lot, there was a lot I needed to learn about the craft. So I got busy learning. And yeah, I'm in my 40s now. So, I have the better part of 30. I have like 30 years working at this. That's how you get good. That's how you become a good writer. It isn't necessarily inborn talent. It's become seriously obsessed with getting as good as you possibly can and keep going for 30 years and then keep going longer. That's how you do it.
Love it. What is your schedule like when you're writing a book?
I don't have a schedule for writing. Whenever I don't have to be doing something else, I write. It's the default activity.
What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
Nothing. Writing is the one thing I can stay focused on without help.
Amazing.
I could be sitting in the living room and my husband's watching a football game and I'm sitting there typing.
Love it. What is your favorite writing snack or drink?
I don't eat between meals and I forget to drink. Hopefully, when I'm lucky, my husband remembers that I forget to drink and he brings me whatever he brings me, water, juice, tea. I'd probably shrivel up and die if it wasn't for him.
What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
All of them. The one earlier today, I was rereading Randall Munroe's How To, which you might want to check out. It explains things like how to build a lava moat and things like that. He's a physicist who used to work for NASA, and now he does this. Last week, I read and very much enjoyed this wonderful little introduction to the physics of waves and beaches. It's a marvelous little thing. Before that, I was reading about octopuses. I do read fiction too. I intend to read everything that Ursula K. Le Guin has ever written. She writes mostly fiction. and I want to read everything of hers, except Lathe of Heaven. I've started that twice, and it frightened me out of my mind both times.
Love it. And I know you touched on this next question, but there might be some others. So, are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
Tim Cahill, as I mentioned, becoming a writer. It's the only one that's really sort of obvious. Like, I just read this and I want to do that. But yeah, there's so many other people who have been influential. My dad's a writer. Growing up around writing was really important. Ursula K. Le Guin, again, I constantly go back to her to figure out, like, okay, how would she do this? How would she get this particular effect? Ernest Hemingway. I know that's a little bit cliched. Everybody wants to be the next Ernest Hemingway, but I tend to be somewhat verbose, and he is the antidote to that. But everything I read goes into the mix somewhere.
Love it. What type of books did you grow up reading? Did you have an all-time favorite?
I didn't have an all-time favorite. I had lots of all-time favorites. The one I've been thinking about again recently a lot is The Wizard of Oz, because I'm working on a Wizard of Oz fan fiction project. Pilgrim of Oz, .wordpress.com if you want to check that out. I'm rewriting the story. So I've just been thinking about the Wizard of Oz a lot lately, but all kind of, Peter Pan was big for a long time. Treasure Island was really big for a long time. Later, Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim was really big. That was important. Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time. That may be one of the best children's science fiction books ever. That was some interesting food for thought. It'd be really cool is if I wrote up a whole list of, all the wonderful books I read as a child, and then you could post that somewhere and get other people to post the same. You can do that if you want.
Sure. Yeah, we have our blog, so we definitely will be adding more information there as well for people who are listening. On the other side of that, now as an adult, what are your favorite series or authors that if something comes out, you're going to grab it no matter what?
I don't pay attention to series. If I happen to read a book that's part of a series, it's kind of hit or miss whether I read the others in the series. But there are a couple of authors I pay attention to. I mean, Le Guin, of course. She's no longer with us, which means unfortunately she's no longer writing, at least not on the earthly plane. But I intend to read everything she's ever written. I'm working on it, a couple of them a year. Everything Randall Munroe writes. He's just come out with a new one. I need to get my hands on that. And also, two of my literary heroes, they also happen to be friends of mine, which is just, amazing. Like, how does this wonderful thing get to happen that I get to be friends with these people? Anyway, Tom Wessels, whose work you should definitely check out. Reading the Forested Landscape is the one that everybody really gets into. So every time he comes out with a new book, I want to read it. And Charles Curtin, now he writes heavy, like serious science. You kind of need a degree to be in the same room with one of his books, kind of thing. I can sort of understand what he's talking about if I concentrate, but the man's brilliant. If you can understand what he's talking about, you read one of his things and you're like, mind blown. What, how?
Love it.
So every time he publishes something, I want to read that too.
Amazing. What would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
I'd have to know why they stopped reading in order to tell them anything.
What about someone who's just starting to write their own book? Is there any advice you would give them?
To ask specific questions. Which, by the way, if you go to my website, my contact information is on there. If anybody hearing this is starting out and wants to ask specific questions, you shoot me an email. That's fine. I love talking shop, but sort of very vague advice that sounds like it might apply to every writer, in my experience, it generally doesn't. So ask specific questions.
A good one. I love that. We haven't heard that one yet. What's one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
I don't know. I feel like I'm misunderstood a lot, and a lot of people don't realize that they've misunderstood me, so they never get around to being surprised. This past winter, something blew up and I dealt with it quite well, and everybody around me was like, wow, that's amazing. And I thought, why are you surprised that I handled this? Didn't you know I could do this? I did it the last time this blew up. So there's that.
Is there anything you would like to say or add?
I like talking about writing. I think you're at the end of your questions, but I kind of wish you had more of them. But but I can't think of anything specific to add.
Where's the best place for readers to find your book? I know some books, I apologize. I know some readers love signed copies. Is that an option? And the best place to connect with you?
Best place to connect with me, and yeah, the way to get signed copies would be to go to my website. That's newsfromcaroline.wordpress.com. My contact information is there. There's a blog on there where I talk about what I'm doing and what I'm thinking about as well. If you want to order a signed copy, shoot, I haven't been able to set up a storefront on my website. I tried and I couldn't get it to work. But if you shoot me an email, we can figure it out. I'm on Facebook too, and I'm the only Caroline Ailanthus in the world. So my name makes a really great online search term. My books are also on Amazon. They're on my publisher's website as well. So if you're not looking for a signature, that's a pretty convenient place to pick them up. Or ask your local bookstore. You go into your local bookstore, say, where are your Caroline Ailanthus books? And they'll go, who? And then you explain. And then they order my books. And great, another bookstore's carrying my books. So that'd be cool.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Carolyn. We loved getting to interview you. We'll be sure to drop your link in the show notes. That way everyone can find you. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you.